Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Erasing the Stigma. Today, I'm here with Megan Pinchback, who is a certified academic language therapist. Would you be able to tell listeners a little bit about yourself and your program, Dyslexia on Demand?
Sure. Again, Megan Pinchback. I am the owner of Dyslexia on Demand, and I am a certified academic language therapist. Because there are not a ton of certified academic language therapists, in other words, CALT, out there. I just would like to explain that we are basically the highest level of dyslexia interventionists that you can be, and we are the only ones who are nationally board certified.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for explaining. So, would you be able to give listeners a broad overview of the therapies that Dyslexia on Demand uses and why these therapies work?
Sure. So dyslexia on demand, if you're not familiar with us, we are a virtual based company, and we work one-on-one with therapeutic level interventions for children with dyslexia. Because of the fact that we are virtual, we can work with students despite their geographic location, and especially in areas where there are not as many CALTs, which means a certified academic language therapist. The two programs that we specifically primarily are working in are called Take Flight, created by the Texas Scottish Rite Hospital for Children, and Basic Language Skills, created by Nyhouse Education Center. And the only people who are qualified in order to deliver these therapeutic level interventions are CALTs. The reason that these are very successful, first of all, I like to point out that these are evidence-based programs, in other words, research-based programs, meaning that years of research have gone into them, and we have actual, data showing their effectiveness. But kind of the main pillars of any therapeutic level program is that it needs to be multisensory, meaning it's Orton Gillingham based. It needs to be explicit, meaning we're teaching the why behind everything. This is structured literacy, so this is not something that kind of happens haphazardly. We're teaching the rule-based reasoning to why we read and spell in specific ways. It is systematic, meaning that it is cumulative, it is building on each other. So a student should never see something that they haven't been directly instructed on by a therapist, which really helps with confidence building. And then one of the last really important pieces of a therapeutic intervention is that it is very high repetition, because that is what the dyslexic brain needs. So any of our therapists are going to use one of those programs as the base and execute that with fidelity, but based on the needs of the student. Remember, we're making therapeutic level decisions. So even though we're following this curriculum, we are tailoring it specifically to the needs of the student, because dyslexia does not present itself like a carbon copy in every child. So sometimes we are layering on additional programs or approaches in order to help ensure that that child receives, the everything that they might need in order to move, forward in their instruction.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for explaining. And so one of the pillars that you talked about is that you guys explain the why behind the reading and the writing. And I think that's very interesting that you guys do that. I really like that because I feel like that's something that we never think about, explaining the why. I feel like so many people just assume that reading and writing are things that we naturally do, but we don't ever converse about the why. So I really love that. And then another pillar that really spoke to me was that it was systematic. So that is confident building for the children. So, on that note, what are tips that you would give to parents to help improve their child's self esteem and confidence when it comes to their language based learning disability?
So one of the things that I think that I like to bring up with parents is that we need to address the fact that they have dyslexia and speak openly about it. So I think that there are so many resources nowadays that you can, go towards in order to help to lead that conversation. There are so many individuals who are very successful and famous out there, who children might be able to identify with and be able to see, as examples of success. So I think those are really great things to do. And also for parents to, specifically say that even though they were born, with this language-based learning disability, and their brain isn't, reading with automaticity, and spelling with automaticity in the way that it was designed to, what that basically means is that another part of their brain has kind of taken over, with its own strength areas. So, we now have a new hashtag dyslexic thinking, indicating that these are kids who have this extra skill set that, not everybody has. So they tend to think more, non-linearly. They are great critical thinkers. They have so many, adaptation skills, that kind of thing, that actually lend to them potentially having, even though we can overcome the dyslexia piece of it, but they're gifted with a lot of other things. So I think that really helps to, build kiddos' self-esteem.
And I 100% agree. I really like that point of view to look at the positive aspects that come out of dyslexia because often we just associate with dyslexia with the challenges that it entails. But you're right, there's so many positive things that can come out of it, and there's so many talented people who have dyslexia. And I agree with you. I suggest to parents if your child is interested in a specific activity, for example, let's say your child really likes building Legos. Maybe try to find some famous people with dyslexia who are engineers or other things that align with your child's interests so they can see other people succeeding with dyslexia and they can translate that confidence and that drive to succeed into themselves. So I really do agree with everything that you're saying. So
I,
when you were introducing Dyslexia on Demand earlier, you said that the CALT, if I'm saying that right, your therapist, you guys are certified nationwide. And so I think that that is phenomenal because there's a lot of places in the United States and in other places around the world where access to dyslexia reading programs and therapies are very limited. And it's also a very big issue that parents are struggling to get their child the help they need in schools because schools often, unfortunately, put up a lot of roadblocks and restrictions. So, what advice would you give to parents if they're living in an area with poor intervention requirements or the lack of access to help for their child?
so that is actually the whole, you know, concept behind Dyslexia on Demand, was to be able to reach these children, in areas that are underserved. So, in particular, I live in, even though Texas has several certified academic language therapists, I live rurally, so those children don't have that same amount of access. So even before COVID, I had come up with this concept of utilizing distance learning to be able to reach all those students, because unfortunately, I would say, around 50% of our states, our US states, have 10 or fewer registered CALTs in the whole state. So obviously, this profession needs to grow significantly so that we can reach all of the students. So that is, just kind of my general idea behind why Dyslexia on Demand was even born. And now we're proud to serve kids in 23 states and 5 countries. So access still is there. There are options, and doors that are open, even when you are in a situation in which you can't get the level of servicing that your children need. And then my other suggestion would be, and something that I like to, I really like in my daily work to make sure that I help to educate parents on dyslexia and advocacy so that they understand, their rights as special education parents. So I think that piece is really important, educating yourself in that so that you can go to the school and, get what you need for your students. Sometimes it is an uphill battle. And that is something that I, speak to parents about daily. But one of the things that I don't think parents recognize they have an option to is to employ an educational advocate, especially someone who is specializes in dyslexia, in order to be kind of a third party to go in and help them to get, with the schools to get what they need for their children. So it's one of those things, one of the avenues that I don't think that everyone is aware of. And I would always recommend that to parents, especially because a lot of times parents don't want to seem like they are pushy because they're concerned about the day to day for their kids on campus. And so sometimes when we bring in a third party, it doesn't feel as confrontational, but ultimately that third party knows the law very well and can help to kind of grease the wheels to get what students need.
And I think that is an amazing suggestion because if your child is just being diagnosed with dyslexia or another language-based learning disability, or they're entering school and they are what feels like all of a sudden presenting these symptoms that you are recognizing, it might feel overwhelming for many parents of where do you start with this research? And that is a great option to go to a third party who's well versed in this and knows where to start and can help you through this process.
Mhm.
So, at what age would you suggest a child starts therapy for dyslexia?
So specific therapy is generally, these therapeutic level programs are designed specifically from anywhere from 7 to 13 years old. That being said, we can see characteristics of dyslexia before 7. And there are lots of early intervention steps that parents can take, such as employing a certified academic language therapist, a CALT, to do that early intervention work. A lot of the work isn't even directly reading or spelling. We're working on phonemic awareness, meaning just kind of those precursor skills to reading. And a lot of it is actually verbal, right? So just that ability to be able to hear sounds, segment sounds, manipulate sounds, that kind of thing. And then, moving into letter identification and then attaching that letter name and sound and that kind of work. That foundation has to be present before we can even start with therapy. So if you have a pre-kindergartner or a kindergartner and you're starting to get suspicion or concern about it, they're not making the progress they should be, that is a place to start. And especially if you have a family history watching that piece, right? But classic therapy will start around, sometimes I've started children around mid sixth grade, mid 6 years old, if they have proven that they have a good solid foundation and are ready to move forward, but typically 7 through 13. But I do not want to dissuade anyone who is older than 13 from getting the intervention help that they need. We do work with several middle schoolers, high schoolers, and even adults through therapy. The important thing to understand when it comes to therapy, though, is we're working with the brain's neural plasticity to basically rewire the brain and help to stimulate those areas of the brain that are underfunctioning based on their dyslexia. So, the younger you are, the higher your neural plasticity. So, the older you are, sometimes the longer it can take in remediation, and why it takes somebody very skilled and talented, an experienced CALT to be able to see that difference between, the compensation that, for example, a high schooler has been doing for so many years, and where their true skill lie. So to be able to just kind of, sort through all that masking, but it is completely achievable. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer in order to do this, but obviously I recommend this to everybody. All of the research out there on therapy, though, has all been collected on ages 7 through 13.
Okay, that is great. And so, like you were saying, you are basically working with a wider age range. So you're going from 7, where kids are younger and they might not fully be able to wrap their heads around the struggles that are being presented. And then you go to ages 13, where kids are older, they might have more of an understanding, but they're still young, they're still 13. And again, going back to that confidence piece, whether they're at the lower part of that age range at 7 or the higher part at 13, they are still dealing with the fundamental issue that this might be hard on their confidence, especially if they are working through the therapy and they're feeling like they're not making the progress that they want to make personally. And
Mhm.
so I know in your therapy, you use the repetition to help build the confidence in kids, which I think is amazing. But for parents who are watching this who wants their kids to start with dyslexia on demand, as their kids are going through this process, what is one positive affirmation that parents can use with their kids at home? So if their kids are feeling like they're falling behind or they're not doing how they want to do succeed or meeting that benchmark that they want to, what is one thing that parents can say every day with their kids to make them feel confident?
I think that a lot of times, and first of all, I do want to reinforce what you're saying is that basically in a nutshell that there is a huge social emotional impact to dyslexia on children, and we recognize that as therapists, and that is something that's very, it's one of the pillars of our mission here at Dyslexia on Demand, and something that we make sure that our therapists address in therapy sessions, and that is talking about the struggles and the strains related to their dyslexia, because I always say there's a decent chance that that is the closest person in their environment to someone who can be really empathetic to the walk that they're taking on a daily basis. So that is really important. We even have mental health support groups within Dyslexia on Demand, where we're pairing kids of similar ages and grade ranges with a mental health therapist. So we're putting all those kids together so that they can identify with each other, along with a therapist to help them, kind of address, what does this feel like? What are some of the struggles? What are some of the positive things with dyslexia, etc. So just so that you know those things, those opportunities do exist out there. When you're talking about how a parent addresses the dyslexia, I always like to make sure that they impart in their children that dyslexia actually has nothing to do with their intelligence. It's not a direct correlation. And in fact, the majority of individuals impacted by dyslexia are of average to above average intelligence. So reminding them that this has nothing to do with how smart they are, even though in school they may often feel, very behind, and they don't understand why the kiddo next to them seems to be so successful, whereas they know that they're so intelligent, but they don't feel the fruits of their labor all the time, right? So I think that that is really important for kids to understand, and that therapy is really a marathon. It's not a sprint. We are going through, and we're not just kind of dropping in on one specific, right where they are and then moving forward. What we are doing is we're rebuilding their entire foundation. So it can be a long process, but because of the fact that we're not tutoring, we are going in there and we're working on the creation of new neural pathways. We are helping to create that automaticity that reading and spelling should become for them eventually. So that should release so much of that strain that they're experiencing on a daily basis. So it is a process. And I always like to be really transparent, especially with our older students, that we just kind of have to buckle in sometimes, and to get to the meat, because sometimes to their mental age brain, some of this stuff might seem baby, but to their dyslexic brain, it really is heavy lifting. So it all is a process.
Yes, and that is definitely something that if parents go forward with the dyslexia therapy, that they should remind their kids that it is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And it is well worth it to go through this process, even though at times it could feel a little bit challenging. So I really, really appreciate all of the wonderful advice that you have given me and my listeners. And the last question I want to ask you is, what is one thing listeners can do to erase the stigma behind language-based learning disabilities?
So I think I mentioned this a little bit before, but one of my biggest things that I tell everyone is to use that word, dyslexia. It's not a bad word, and it doesn't imply that you are less intelligent. It just means that you were born without your brain functioning with its phonological processing. So, 17 to 20% of our population out there is equally impacted, even though they're not identified. I think that the more that we use this and that we talk about it, the more that parents especially are pushing for changes in legislation. Eventually I'd love to see insurance coverage of dyslexia therapies, that kind of thing. I think the more that we do erase the stigma, the more that we compare our stories, and freely talk about the fact that I have dyslexia, so other people can identify and go, well, you know, this individual is not, is very intelligent, but they have their own struggle. I think that we all have internal struggles that we kind of can tend to shelter and not talk about very frequently. But I think that the more that everybody is actively discussing and using this word, the more that we realize how many people are impacted, and we just kind of get rid of that stigma where we recognize, wow, some of the most brilliant people and most successful entrepreneurs and billionaires out there are dyslexic. Actually, in fact, whereas 10% of our average population are very successful entrepreneurs or millionaires and so on, it's actually, when you look at who is out there, it's 35% of them are dyslexic.
Wow.
So, when we put focus on the positive things and not the struggle, and we talk about it openly and we say dyslexia, I think that's how we work as a community to try to erase that stigma, because there really shouldn't be one out there.
And I completely agree. There shouldn't be a stigma. And I think that stigmas are often created based on false notions. And the stigmas surrounding dyslexia are often created around the false notion that people with dyslexia are not intelligent. And if we do, like you were saying, use the word dyslexia and point to the specific strengths, saying that I can do this and I'm really good at this because I have dyslexia, it takes away the power of the stigma by showing the strength and the positivity of dyslexia. So I am going to try my best through my Coloring Confidence program to constantly reinforce the positive aspects of dyslexia. And I hope everyone who's listening to this can do the same and use the word dyslexia and know that dyslexia is not in the least bit a bad thing. So thank you again so much for speaking with me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you for all the efforts that you're making out there for kids with dyslexia.
Thank you.